I very much enjoy and think it's important to speak about diversity, but I also very much enjoy speaking about my primary areas of expertise in data and software.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Ansuya.
Welcome, Stefany, to the Swisspreneur podcast. We're very glad to have you here today.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So Stefany is an entrepreneur, investor, and currently working at Palantir as a tech lead. Palantir is one of the world's leading data science companies. So Stefany, we'll get right into it with, firstly, your personal story. And there's so many interesting things to talk about today. Like you've founded various organizations. You've really worked on the topic of diversity and tech for good. So I'm super excited to be discussing that with you. And so many transitions that you've made and added on, enriched your personal life with your professional life. So happy to discuss that as well today.
Yeah, excited. Thanks.
All right. So Stefany, you studied management, information systems, and innovation in London. You've been also, as you mentioned to me previously, traveling around, lived in different cities and countries. So why did you decide, like having also grown up here in Switzerland, to go and study abroad?
So part of my thinking was exposure to a variety of cultures, and part of it was also exposure to the business and mentality around starting something new and entrepreneurship. I think the biggest contrast in cultures you can take is like Swiss or continental European versus American, where failure is celebrated, if not quite celebrated, but accepted. Whereas in continental Europe, it's a little more complicated. So I wanted to be in an environment where the learning methods were different and the attitude around entrepreneurship was more encouraging than it was in Switzerland.
Awesome. And how did it go, like professionally, for you being there as a student? Because you already had started to explore with your entrepreneurial interests back then. Mm-hmm. So how did all of that like sort of shape out in London?
Well, it started out as filling a gap in what I saw in terms of tech events offerings in London and organizations for students to bridge between tech companies and where I was in my studies, and came across organizations that facilitated entrepreneurship. And then I started applying my skills from event and community organizing to businesses through organizations like Entrepreneur First. So it wasn't an entirely intentional move to starting organizations, but naturally through my interests, I came across organizations that facilitated that.
And what kind of inspired you to, go in this direction in the first place? So what attracted you or drew you towards these programs, for example, back then?
It had a lot to do with the ambition or the focus of making positive change through these organizations. And I enjoy building things from scratch. And so the combination of those two were really interesting. I also really enjoy organizations that innovate business models to change the way a market works for the better. So Entrepreneur First, for example, identified that if you were to take individual founders, even before they had an idea, and put them together and gave them the right circumstances in terms of access, ideas, educating them about industries and starting a business, then you would sort of artificially create an environment in which businesses flourish. And so when I see smart business models, innovative business models like that, I want to be a part of it and support it. And that's exactly what Entrepreneur First was doing or was starting to do and has now been doing for more than 10 years with a lot of success.
Perfect. And did you manage to do something interesting out of the program? Did you meet people that you continue to work with later on as well?
Yeah, there were Well, three interesting takeaways from Entrepreneur First. The first one is I had a coding program as part of it, and of course met people through that, but developed some pretty fundamental skills I still use today. Second were skills more in entrepreneurship. So they adopt the lean startup methodology, so a lot around the focus and customer centricity, building, testing. You're probably familiar with lean methodology. And of course, the people that you meet through the program were extraordinary and inspiring. And so between the sort of two types of skill sets and the people you're exposed to, you really get a lot out of the program.
Wow, great. I should have also tried for one of these programs now that you're explaining it.
Yeah, and there are a few that exist, and it's quite smart. It's over several months. At the time, it was when I went through the program, it was the second year, so they were still iterating on the model, and now it's very, very solid and very competitive to get in.
Okay. And then in 2016, right, you went on to found Girls in Tech Switzerland, right? This was your first venture, which was focused on an inclusive tech community. So how did that journey from, going into these different programs and building up yourself entrepreneurially lead you to this more driven, focused building of a community here in Switzerland?
Yeah, so when I came back to Switzerland in 2015 or 2016, I had set out to build a business. I had a few hypotheses for business ideas, and I missed the community I had in London around technology expertise, where what existed in Switzerland was either digital marketing, which wasn't my area of tech, or let's say pure kind of code clubs, code reviews, which I love as well. But I wanted something in between, which were tech experts events that were talking about the future of technology, the implications in our lives and in our businesses, without almost more from a bridging between business and tech perspective. And that didn't exist. And so I set out to create it. I had worked with GirlsinTech in London before, so I used that as a vehicle. And then the other... and it's through GirlsinTech that I later found out that there was actually a big tech talent gap and gender gap, but it wasn't entirely intentional. I was a solo entrepreneur and wanted to find my community and people who cared about similar things to me. So I created it.
And how was it like the experience of being in these girls and tech communities and leading the chapter here in Switzerland? How is it different, or how was it as well beneficial from other tech communities that you have experienced?
I think it's similarly beneficial to other communities. What I enjoy very much about the principles of GirlsinTech Switzerland is that we want to organize tech events where people are coming because they're experts in their area, and it's a diverse and gender balanced set of experts that are joining the conversation. But the discussion is not about diversity in tech most of the time. It's very much about the people's expertise and putting a spotlight on role models that resemble people, the majority of people, and encouraging women in particular, but people in general, to join the workforce, where in Switzerland we're 117,000 tech workers short, which is a lot. And women will help close the gap, but not only. So...
Yeah, you mentioned this, and this is an astonishing number. So tell me more about this tech gap that you noticed, and also, you as well started TechFace in 2018 for this very purpose, trying to cover these two aspects, the talent gap as well as the diversity in tech. So tell me more about, why then started this one.
Yeah, so as we were building out GirlsinTech Switzerland, we had members of the community qualified tech workers struggling to find work. And on the flip side, we had companies coming to us who wanted to improve their candidates' pipelines. And so we knew there was a problem in the model, and the recruitment model is the traditional recruitment model is that you get paid per person you place. And so companies will hire recruiters when they have a specific job to fill. Generally, they'll hire recruiters if they haven't already filled it through their employee network. If you hire through your employee network, that can mean that you end up having very similar profiles of people, so going against diversity. So we wanted to change that. And the principle of TechFace, which we realized through some of the company branding in Girls in Tech, is that you have to build relationships with your candidates a year before you actually have a job for them. So that's one principle. Is most companies are not famous, even if they are a candidate is not naturally inclined to work with you unless you build a sort of company relationship similar to retail. It's no longer transactional. You build a relationship with a brand over time. And second, you have to get to know a person beyond their CV. So we had a conference, our flagship conference with TechFace recently, and we have talent matching events where companies will meet candidates, and the idea is for them to get a sense of the person, their learning attitude, and versus focusing only on their CV. So we've had companies be skeptical about it because they'll judge on the CV as they have so far. And then they'll come to the event and they'll walk out saying, I think every person in that room is a potential candidate for our company. Where if they had taken only the CV as a basis, they're trying to match so much based on the experience versus the attitude and the learning capabilities of the person in front of them.
Yes. For me as well, in the different projects and companies that I continuously hire for, I see it exactly the same way as you're mentioning it. That on the CV, of course, the skills, they're important, but what is more important is how they would assimilate into your team, their attitude, their working style.
Yeah.
Because in the end, actually learning a new skill is more of the attitude itself. Like they could learn a new tech skill, they could learn how to program.
Yeah.
But if they don't fit well into the culture of your team or your company, then it doesn't really work out that great.
Exactly.
All right. And how does it work with the companies? Do they approach you? How do you set up this, network?
Yeah, so the companies work with us on an annual subscription basis. So the incentives we wanted to change there is we require of the companies that they are engaged with the community. So they have to attend events, they go through an audit. We have an initiative called Role Models in Tech where companies are joining us to walk the talk of diversity. So not only are they communicating about diversity, but they're actually taking steps like job sharing and others that make a workplace more inclusive. And so the idea is that if a company has partnered with TechFace, we've looked at them for the type of workplace they are. We want to provide that service to our community and protect the community to be working with organizations that are aligned with our values as TechFace and therefore the community that adheres to TechFace.
You mentioned job sharing. So that's also something that I see coming up a lot lately.
Yeah.
And I also see that as more of a need coming from women rather than men.
Yeah.
Like, how do you see certain kinds of, let's say, working styles different between men and women and how it needs to be catered to, if at all?
I don't have very strong opinions about this. I recommend you speak to my co-founder, who is an expert in creating more diverse and inclusive workplaces.
Okay. And how many people are there, running TechFace? Is there...
Yeah, so we have my managing director, we have a digital marketing lead, and we have a person leading the development of our talent matching platform, which is a platform that removes the CV and focuses on skills and expertise and wants to emphasize the meeting candidates versus judging purely on CV. So the aim there is to focus more on skills and expertise in the qualitative sense, and culture matching versus only a sort of most cases where it's a machine that's analyzing a CV, and a very sort of less qualitative analysis of a person based on their CV only.
And do you focus mostly in Switzerland or also other places around Europe?
At the moment, we're focusing on Switzerland. We're thinking about, we're thinking about growing either sort of growing into different countries with similar offerings as what we offer in TechFace in Switzerland. So that would be the platform, the conferences, talent matching events, and expanding out. At the moment, a big focus is the platform, which is in its beta stages now, with a few of our customers already on the platform, and a few hundred candidates on the platform. And so we'll see. It's definitely an objective to expand that beyond Switzerland once the proof of concept is complete.
All right. Thank you. We will definitely check it out as well. You know, the companies I work for could be very useful for us as well.
Yeah, great.
So I'm curious to know, there are a lot of such organizations that have started coming up lately. Like, what is the effort and, the due diligence that is needed to start such organizations? How do you kind of go around acquiring the people that you need to run it and set the whole thing up?
An organization like TechFace?
Yes.
So I don't know, because it came from a more organic place, I want to say, where we had built a community that trusted us already. And so when we were able to, we joined forces with a lot of the communities that existed. I'm thinking about, I think, Women in Digital, We Shape Tech. And so we knew there was a place for our organization, both GirlsinTech and TechFace, but we also knew we needed to join forces. All of our, whenever we set out a goal, the first thing we do is, are there any initiatives that exist that we can join forces with? So my recommendation would be, if you're thinking of starting an organization or you want to work towards a goal, start by thinking what exists that we can join forces with to build upon. And then if you conclude there's something unique that you should build, then great. But maybe there's something that exists that you can bring leverage to and benefit from, hopefully yourself as well.
So here you would say basically networking with the right organizations was the key to kind of get into understanding what is missing and getting the right partnerships, essentially.
Yeah, totally. So when we started GirlsinTech Switzerland, we had a few events that were not niche enough. So we started organizing a couple of events. I mean, they were popular, but we realized we weren't positioning ourselves. So, for example, we explicitly chose not to focus on startup skills. We only focus on, our primary focus is women in tech, but in the corporate sense, so in the career sense. So you're focusing on career topics and tech topics, and that's it. But that was through iteration and seeing what worked and seeing what was existing in the market. So there's an element of understanding what's in the market and positioning yourself, and then just testing and seeing what works well and what is unique to you, and whether, when you're putting those things out there, whether you're attracting the crowd you intended to.
Now, both these organizations are, taglining and kind of focusing on promoting and fixing the whole diversity issue. Earlier, when we talked about it, we also discussed this sort of common pain point that diversity is being too much harped upon. Being a woman, like, it's being brought too much into the focus versus our skills. So what do you feel about this? Like, how has this kind of affected you in your career?
I mean, I don't know whether it's affected me in my career, and that's the part where it's like, on the one hand, I mean, I think there's been a lot of improvement over time where people are a little more sensitive to it. But the part where I've kind of changed my own policy is I will not participate to events on the topic of diversity that neither, at the very least, cover costs and, at the medium pay their speakers. You cannot host an event about diversity and inclusion and then expect people, often the unrepresented people that they're asking to speak about, you know, the issues, to come unpaid or at their own cost. So that's been a change in I would say that impacts my decisions and where I choose to spend my time. So in that sense, it affected my career because I chose not to engage with organizations that go down that path. And so, yeah, and I very much enjoy and think it's important to speak about diversity, but I also very much enjoy speaking about my primary areas of expertise in data and software.
And in your professionally, like in your jobs, like did this ever be a topic where you felt like, oh, you're being maybe not appreciated enough or a bit prejudiced against because you're a woman and you're in technology?
Not explicitly. Not explicitly. Of course, it's hard not to feel like you stand out when you're, you know, in a team of 30 people and you're the only one that looks a little different. But it's not explicit, and that's the whole point about unconscious bias. And I purposely choose organizations that I know walk the talk of their values. So when we talk about culture, we talk about actions and behaviors, and I just won't tolerate a workplace that doesn't have that. And so I've had job offers or investment opportunities for organizations that don't have diversity, and worse, have told me that they do not value diversity when I asked, you know, what's the plan with this? And I just won't engage with them. It's as simple as that. I think you have to vote with your feet and vote with your wallet to change it. So it's a little bit inevitable that I luckily haven't felt the effects of it, and I have much felt the effects of it, and I have chosen organizations to engage with on the basis that they create an environment where you're much less likely to fall into those traps, which are easy to fall into.
And what do you feel like other women who come and speak to you, what are some of the challenges that you see are commonly faced amongst them in the tech world?
I would say in the tech world specifically, the most common one is people, and I've faced this as well, people making assumptions about how technical I am on the basis that I am that I am female and that, you know, I like to dress cute and stuff. So feminine and female, and there are assumptions made. And then the other one, but I don't think is specific to the tech sector, is when you come of childbearing age or average childbearing age, it will be assumed that you might have kids soon. And because we don't have parental leave in Switzerland, that makes you allegedly riskier candidate. And I mean, I think, I don't know whether this is your experience too, but every person I have spoken to has said when they do interviews around the like 28 to 30 something age, they have been asked in interviews whether or not they plan to have kids, which is completely illegal.
Yeah.
But somehow totally normalized.
Wow. And is that more you see here in Switzerland?
Oh, well, in places like the UK, for example, that's just not acceptable. And in the UK, they're quite advanced because in their even their administration, the signals are very strong in terms of, you know, actually for whatever reasons ended up getting married in the UK instead of Switzerland. And even on the forms there, it says parent 1, parent 2, and it gives you the option of how you would like to be addressed, bridegroom or none. And those are really subtle, but in the same forms in Switzerland, it says mother and father. And so anyways, I think in the UK, they naturally have through processes, you know, you're not allowed to put your address on a CV. They've even been thinking about like removing names. You definitely can't put a picture like in Switzerland. I mean, I don't know whether it's still the same now, but back in the days, you were expected to put a picture on your CV, which is
funnily enough,
strange.
It is actually still the same. Like when I was working in the US 5 years before this is not the norm there, right? And earlier this year, I was circulating my CV. And some of the people, like Swiss people, wrote back to me asking me to put in some of these details, including my photograph, which I found quite rather old school, because who does that anymore?
Yeah, it's
but
weird.
It's still, unfortunately, it's still the case.
Yeah, and that's mad. You put your date of birth, you put your marital status. Like, what the hell?
Yeah.
That's completely irrelevant to my competencies.
Definitely. Well, I mean, hopefully things are changing slowly, and organizations like the ones you are leading are definitely making a difference. Let's also speak a bit about, you were working operationally in these, and then you transitioned into an advisory role. So how was that whole journey like for you?
Really fun, and I mean, at first it's a bit scary because you create, TechFace was not so scary because my co-founder stayed in the business active. So that was a little more natural transition and, a happy transition. GirlsinTech Switzerland was amazing transition. But of course, at first, you're sort of, you don't really know how it's going to work. It was the first transition I was making. But where it did happen organically because I participated in the mentor-mentee matching program that TechFace proposes. And I had been matched with a mentee, and I'd known her for, a year or two at this point. And I knew she wanted to pivot into tech. I knew how organized she was. And anyways, she turned out to be the perfect candidate to become the next managing director for GirlsinTech Switzerland. She surrounded herself with an incredible team. And at the beginning, you're a bit more involved. You want to give them all the tools they need. And then you step back and you realize they're doing a better job than I think I could have done myself. So it's really rewarding to see that, and to still be able to support them as a board member, which is a very different role because you have touch points every sort of 3 months. You're looking at big picture topics. And then the way I work, at least, is if they have a work stream that they want me to collaborate on more closely, I will do in both organizations. So you get to kind of like move either from a bit more advisor strategic roles into something a little more operational if it's your expertise, and give them more hands-on support. But there are quite a few considerations. Their motivations, the length of commitment that they're willing to sign up for. But ultimately, I could see the characteristics and her motivations, like why it made sense to her to take on this role. And so, I think that those three factors combined just made it very clear that she was going to do great. And the leadership element was really important because, of course, you can choose one person, whether it's a CEO or in this case, managing director, to take the lead. But the leadership and the ability to surround themselves with people who are smarter even than they are in certain areas is the most important skill. Because that's what powers up a team. And she's really, Corinne and Lisa have been able to build a team around them of highly motivated individuals that understand the mission, the purpose, and how it's serving them. It's been more, I would say, they've had better success than honestly I could have done ourselves. And it's been great to see it evolve over time.
Yes, I also follow Lisa on LinkedIn, so I'm always very happy to read her posts, and we've also reached out to each other. So definitely, I see her like working towards the mission and vision quite well.
No, they're amazing, and I hope, of course, that the responsibility of the advisory board is to hold them accountable and make sure they understand even their own value, right? I mean, they're amazing, and they sometimes deserve to be reminded of the amazing results they're getting, and how to engage with organizations so that they're getting the maximum value for their members, for the team, and having a maximum amount of impact.
And in 2017, 2018, you also started WaaS, Website as a Service.
Yeah.
So that was another, venture in your bucket of ventures. Was that also a deciding factor to kind of take a step back on these and focus on this one?
Yeah, so those were happening. So, GirlsinTech Switzerland and WaaS websites were built in the same couple of years. WaaS websites came about because I had come back to Switzerland with the explicit intention of building a business. I mentioned I had a few hypotheses. One was setting up an either software or software consulting for doctors. Which had come from my own frustration that you couldn't book appointments outside of 9 to noon or whatever. And you had medical practitioners, trained medical practitioners, calling people or SMSing people to remind them about their appointments, which I think is mad. And so I set out to fix it. But in my interviews, I found that the payer of the product was not the person feeling the pain of the product. And so the offering didn't work. But in the meantime, I was helping friends with their WordPress websites and so on. And I realized that the model there was that in Switzerland, the market is that you pay 20 to 50K for a new website, and then any maintenance is at least 160 francs an hour. And this price point just doesn't work for the majority of small businesses in Switzerland. If you're a stylist starting out, if you're a hairdresser, if you're a shop. And so I wanted to create something that was better suited to their needs. And I had looked into some of the stats. 60% of businesses in Switzerland don't have a website, which is a huge stat. But if you're thinking like you're just starting out and you're supposed to fork out 20K for websites, like I understand why they don't, right? And so I wanted to create a model that that gave them a more stable payment to make each month. It meant income was more stable for me as a business, and it meant I didn't need to count my hours. Because when I was in the traditional model of like charging, you know, a couple $100 an hour, whatever solutions I would propose to the clients, they would always choose the one that was cheapest, not necessarily the best. And so with a subscription service, they were able to call me for whatever edits they needed, and then I could implement whatever I thought was the best solution. So I came around to WaaS websites as a need I had identified outside of what I was focusing primarily. And then, yes, you're right. I then had to put energy into that. But the transition to becoming a board member actually came. I continued to be quite active in the team when I then transitioned to working for Palantir. And then when I was based in Singapore for Palantir, that's when I realized I couldn't be present enough. And so as part of that, we ended up transitioning the team to be more local and more active, and it was amazing to build my network and sort of those objectives that I had originally, and also felt happy to give those opportunities to another team who clearly deserves it.
Wow, it's really impressive to hear how you're, continuously in your career were able to successfully manage multiple initiatives at the same time. I'm curious to know more about WaaS. Like you mentioned that WaaS was, started with the intention to democratize websites for small businesses. So was this from the point of view of price, user-friendliness?
So both. So the price point was definitely something that I thought was really mismatched. So I've mentioned the price point. The other one was, I thought the solutions were mismatched because the standard tool was WordPress, and now there are other providers that have caught up to them. At least caught up to the level that those small businesses need in terms of SEO rankings, for example. And WordPress was still too advanced for the customers to have any autonomy in the configuration of the website. So choosing solutions that were better suited to the client's needs. And then the service proposition was also one that I thought was important, because when you're a small business owner and websites are not your area of expertise, to be able to call someone and say, hey, I'd like to add a page to do this, or I'd like to make this modification. There's a certain like reassurance that you can call someone and you're not going to get a surprise 3,000 franc bill because you asked them to add a page or update an image or whatever it might be. And so on the one hand, my clients can, if they so wish, update the website themselves because of the tools we're using. And then on the flip side, if they want to call me and make the edits, it's included. They pay the same price per month, and I'm at their service. So I think that there's a comforts level as well to know, I know how much I'm going to pay, and I know I've got a partner that I can call anytime to help me keep evolving my website alongside my business, which is evolving too.
Great. And how many people are helping you on WaaS?
So WaaS, I am alone. I work with a maximum of 6 clients per year. Given my sort of time constraints. I really enjoyed the creative process of building the websites, working with the customers to understand their business, their vision for the business, and bringing that all together. So yeah, it's a bit of a more creative, differently creative outlet for me. So I really enjoy it.
Wonderful. And how are you able to manage that with now Palantir? And, Palantir is known, as everyone is aware, leading company in data science area. So how did that opportunity arise, and how are you balancing both of these?
Yeah, so the opportunity arose. So the context was that I had been building WaaS websites, GirlsinTech and TechFace for a couple of years. Things were running, and the sorts of I would say concepts were proven for TechFace and WaaS websites, and of course GirlsinTech was running. And so I met with a friend who I had done one of my coding courses with, and she just kind of interrogated me on where I was at, and I really enjoyed building out. But once it was running, I was less engaged. And so she said, "Look, I work for this organization that works on really, really big problems, and you get to build a lot of stuff, from scratch and solving these problems. And I think you'd be perfect for it." And I looked into the company. I had to really think for myself in terms of the type of work we'd be engaging with, and got really excited the more I kind of learned about them. And I was interested in working on bigger problems. So, at the moment, focusing on accelerating drug discovery, these are like problem sizes that have a giant impact on the quality of people's lives.
Definitely.
I wanted a bit of that, being able to build from scratch.
So in all of sort of your choices, career choices, you've really focused on working in the tech for good area.
Yeah.
And previously when we talked about, you also mentioned that in this year, 2022, you are also investing, through Moonshot, which is an impact investor company.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so the transition there was that I had accumulated somewhere around 20 business ideas, and still very much enjoyed my work with Palantir. And I worked with a business coach who helped me filter the ideas a bit. And, the logic was, let's look at where you could spend your time and money, because of course entrepreneurship is both a time and a financial investment, and look at the different criteria. And so we defined criteria as like, is it innovative? Is it having a positive impact? What's the time commitment you're wanting to make, given your enthusiasm for your role at Palantir today? And we slowly but surely started eliminating different ideas based on that criteria. And what stayed were a few things, one of which was investing through the Moonshot Network. And the idea there was that I could participate in entrepreneurship without being in it actively, because I was able to build TechFace, GirlsinTech, and WaaS websites when I was doing it full time for 2 years. Starting a venture from scratch is not impossible. We know the stories of the successful side hustles, but it's a lot. And doing it with a full-time job that you love and that you're not particularly trying to get away from, right, didn't make sense for me, and doesn't make sense for me. So instead, I chose to engage with entrepreneurship as an investor rather than an entrepreneur myself at this time.
Wonderful. And how do you make these choices through Moonshot? Like, what is kind of the engagement with with the company?
Yeah, so the reason why I chose to work with Moonshot is I had looked into angel investing in general, and I knew, from the outside that was like it's probably inaccessible, but okay, fine, let's look into it. The returns can be pretty great, but the top advice I kind of took away from my research and networking events, angel investors, was that when you go into angel investing, you need to think about your first 5 to 10 investments, not just your first investment, because of the odds. So generally, out of the 10 investments, one will pay for the other, more than pay for the other ones, but you need 10. And so in the typical sort of angel investor circuits, it's a lot of work to do the due diligence, and then the entry price is, it can start at 10K, but it's usually more around 50 to 150. And then the lower price points tend to be the earlier stage startups, so they're riskier. And so I couldn't really find a plan for my first 5 to 10 investments that worked in the traditional model. And then when I came across Moonshots, and I think the Swisspreneur Syndicate, from what I understand, is a similar model, allowed investors to collectively invest a bigger share into companies. And Palantir was one of the companies they had previously invested in. And so I liked the innovation of the model to be able to say, well, these types of companies require big investments, so let's make a big investment, but then split it between smaller investors. So it gives access to companies that I otherwise wouldn't have access to, that are later stage. And so the ticket price is a lot higher, but also the risk is lower. And so with entry points like from 500 francs a month or 10,000 francs one go, you can invest in those companies. So then with those kinds of figures, I could actually start planning, over the space of years, of course, but I could actually start planning my first 5 to 10 investments with them. So yeah, I ended up, again, it's one of those innovative business models that I think is win-win for everyone. They do a lot of the due diligence, which of course we do our own, but there's a big part that they take on, and a lot of the administration. And so you're able to spread your investments over several companies in a way that you wouldn't otherwise. And there's also a selection process that saves you doing your own kind of deal flow yourself. So it works for them as an organization, and it works for us, and it works for the companies that get to raise funds as well.
And you invest in companies globally with Moonshot?
So far, they do have companies from outside. Do you know the social network called Public? It's like following investor investments. I personally didn't invest in that. I invested in what is a Swiss company called Synhelion, which turns CO2 into energy. Very interesting company. I hadn't set out to invest in that kind of company because I wanted to stick to my domain and software. But right. I believe in investing in the change you'd like to see, and the energy transition is one of those things. So I did invest in Synhelion, and now they have a Web3 offering, which they're developing at the moment, but I'm very interested in as well, where they're focusing on the infrastructure of Web3 concepts, metaverse, blockchain. And I think it's a smart way of thinking about it, because similar to Web 2.0, there will be a transformation in terms of the technology that stays and influences our day-to-day lives. But who wins the race is, there will be a lot of cadavers of companies before there are some winning ones. And so buying a basket of companies and focusing on the infrastructure versus the currency itself, or a single company that's on a network, I think is a good way to go about it. So again, innovative business model, smart team, and shifting the industry standard to be win-win for all the stakeholders.
And in your experience, what shift do you see in the future in terms of technology, and what will be more valued in the world?
Yeah. So some of the technologies, I think the big ones and certainly anyone listening will have heard of, are around blockchain and metaverse. I mean, some of the applications that absolutely scream at me is the notary system in Switzerland. Like, this needs to be
Yes.
yes, exactly. Smart contracts need to be a thing sooner rather than later. So that feels like inevitable areas. The metaverse, or at least augmented reality. So you might have seen recently that a lot of companies in the US are no longer doing free returns for e-commerce because it cost them something like 200 billion in the last year, and up from the year before. Because people will order several sizes and then return. I mean, we've all had this experience. But the metaverse with a to-size avatar or an augmented reality tool could make that much more efficient. So these technologies are going to become part of our day-to-day lives. And yeah, we're still in the relatively early adopter phases. And yeah, it's those technologies are an inevitable part of where we're headed. So I think those two will certainly become more important. And the last one is machine learning and artificial intelligence, which is already quite present, but becoming more and more so with the generative AI like Dolly. And we use this a lot in our work at Palantir as well. So these will become day-to-day technologies, and at the moment we're still figuring it out, but that's part of the journey.
And you, I mean, apart from this vision and foresight that you have, of how you want to grow and what kind of companies you wanted to invest in, it was also an interest you mentioned coming from your personal financial, insight that you had. You mentioned as well the interests and hobbies you have are in diversified areas. So you invest in arts, you invest in different kinds of companies, ETFs. So tell us more about how you plan out your personal finances.
The way I think about it is splitting between less risky and riskier investments. So the bulk of my savings go into ETFs. A robo-advisor in particular called Selma. I think robo-advisors are brilliant because they are programmed by calm and rational developers and finance professionals. And so there's less risk to react to the market more emotionally. And ETFs or indexes and ETFs have a 10% average return over time, which I found to be true with the ETF I invest with. So that's one. And then art is one that I value as well. So art is more of art, and I would say real estate are more intrinsic value assets. ETFs are great for cash, but there's no intrinsic value the way art can be hung in your home. And I found, so the challenge I found with art is that I didn't know which artist to bet on. I'm not an art historian. I know which ones I like, but I didn't know which ones would be interesting investments. And I came across an organization called MT Art. They're solving the problem of that artists shouldn't be their own PR team or marketeer. They should focus on their art. And so they curate artists that they think are going to be a success, and they play the role of PR and marketer, creating partnerships, connecting with collectors. And so they're building the profile of their artists. It's similar to the Hollywood actor agency model, where the actor focuses on acting and the agency, builds up their profile. And I've done really well there. So I've bought 3 pieces over the course of the last few years. I asked for a valuation recently of the pieces, and the 2 pieces I bought in 19 and 20 respectively have now more than doubled in value. So of course this is like it's not sold yet. It's not as liquid as an ETF is, but it's definitely beautiful and useful. Yeah. And if it maintains and grows value really well even during an economic crisis. So I invest in arts as well.
And what do you feel about, arts, which is now coming up in the form of digital assets like NFTs versus this real art, that you can hang in your homes.
Yeah.
There's also, as one sees a decline in value
Yeah.
of these tokens. So
Yeah.
what is your input on this?
So NFTs are incredibly useful as certificates of authentication. And you can, of course, print an NFT, or you can have an NFT certificate tied to a physical artwork. And I think that's incredibly useful because the two artworks that are physical artworks that I have paper certificates, which is great. But I'm so nervous of just like losing it in my house that an NFT certificate would be most welcome. And then I bought an NFT, but I bought an NFT from artists called Obvious that use artificial intelligence to create their artworks. And I'd been following for years and wanted an artwork. And their artwork is called Brave New World, which is a reference to the book, which is a sort of dystopian view on technology. And so I thought these sort of layers of AI-generated work, commentary on Brave New World, and the fact it was an NFT was worthwhile buying. But art is one of those where I think if it were to be worth zero, if you still love it, great. And the same applies to NFT. Don't buy an NFT if it were worth zero, you'd be sad. Buy an NFT that you think is beautiful, that you'd love to put either in a digital frame or print and use as physical, which is what I did with mine. I actually got it printed properly and got it framed, even though the framed version is like essentially like a poster of the Mona Lisa, right? It's not really, it's just an impression. The NFT is the actual artwork, but I can take advantage of it in its physical form. So if you have a Bored Ape and you frame it, then great. That's
probably in the future with AR and VR, we will have more of this immersive experience with such digital art as well.
Yeah, those are existing already. And the digital art is fascinating and so intricate and so much work goes into it. So I absolutely believe in it. And yeah, of course, there was a lot of hype, but it's going to continue. It's going to continue existing, of course, being useful.
Great. And so what do you see for yourself in the future? Like, where do you see Stefany Barker?
Yeah, that is a good question. No, I see myself, for now, I very much enjoy, I don't know what my next challenge is. So the client I've been working with on accelerating drug discovery, I'm now going to be switching roles. I'd like to switch closer to a product role, where at the moment I've been on a enterprise implementation role. So I would like to move closer to product. I think often about going back to full-time entrepreneurship. But when I think about that, I think about why do I want to go back to full-time entrepreneurship? And a lot of it has to do with applying entrepreneurship skills, having autonomy, and all the things that I want from entrepreneurship, I currently get in my in the organization I work for and in my projects outside. So there's an element of you don't want to start a business for the sake of starting a business. You want it because you want certain things in your life, and I find that I have those in my life. So if I'm in a similarly satisfied places now and have the opportunity to invest in and engage with more businesses outside of my day job, then I will be very happy.
Yeah, I foresee now that maybe you would go on to full entrepreneurship since there's something bubbling in you. So maybe we'll have another chat sometime about your new venture as well.
With pleasure.
So is there any resources like books or audiobooks, podcasts, or gadgets that you would like to recommend to our listeners?
Yes, so I've mentioned Selma ETF, Moonshot as resources. I listen to, if you enjoy tech, I listen to a podcast called Pivot by Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway. Kara Swisher being the most influential tech journalist and Scott Galloway being a bit more of a tech business strategist. And I use Blinkist. Do you know Blinkist?
Yes.
Yeah. Very much enjoy Blinkist for my more nonfiction books. So yeah, those are the main, those two are the main things I listen to and read, Blinkist and pivot. I am reading at the moment a book called Ministry of the Future, which is a little dystopian about the direction of climate change, but a very good read nonetheless if you need a wake-up call.
And you also mentioned Brave New World earlier, so that's
Yes.
another interesting topic, project as well.
Yeah, Brave New World is a great read. 1984, similar theme. One of my favorite books to reread is Utopia by Thomas More. Very interesting. I mean, the focus is sort of why do we value certain things, and why as a society have we come to value certain things, and putting that into question. So very much enjoy that read too.
Thank you. Wonderful suggestions. So that leads us to our last segment, which is the rapid fire questions. Yes. So you ready for this?
Great, yes.
England or Switzerland?
Switzerland.
If you had 2 job candidates with equal skills and culture fit, and one was male and the other female, which would you hire and why?
It depends on the composition of my existing team and whether there are things that don't fit on a CV that I think the person would bring to the table in terms of the team culture or just a different perspective. So a different perspective can come from, diversity factors like gender and religion, ethnicity, whatever it might be. But it can also come from going to a different school or studying a different diploma than most people in the team, or interests outside of work that maybe bring them, maybe they practice martial arts and that's important. One of my friends got an internship on Google, and they had these 2 candidates, and he ended up getting the job because he was very into football, and it turned out the role needed to develop a community around. It was for Google Plus at the time, if anyone remembers that, and they were developing football communities, and so he ended up getting it because of that, because he was bringing that perspective that was similar to the customer. So I would say in that case, I would look at the current composition of the team and the current goals of the team, and see if there's anything outside of a sort of CV parameters that those candidates could bring to the table.
What does success mean to you?
Success is having financial stability and security. That's kind of fundamental. The next is having meaningful relationships that inspire you to go forth and, be happy and go for whatever you want. This is all quite proven, but relationships are very important. And then feeling that you are building a lifestyle and that you're working towards what you think is your life's work. So day to day, are you living the kind of life you would like for yourself? And are you working towards something that is important to you? In my case, that's having a positive impact on the world. And so I check in with that. But of course, depending on the person, that goal or outcome might look different. But relationships, your lifestyle, and the goals or impact you'd like to have on the world.
What would you like to be known for?
I'd like to be known for having inspired people to feel good about themselves and to live better lives, better quality of life. So if people feel, the people I'm around feel valued and heard and better for having me in their lives, then I've done well, whether that's customers or friends or family.
I think you're already doing that. So
thank you.
It was an absolute pleasure to speak with you today and hear about your story and different insights on, valuable topics. Thank you for joining us.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, you can support us by rating our show on Apple Podcasts. This way, we can reach an ever-growing number of aspiring entrepreneurs.